A new poll is out, and it's been testing messages designed to undercut public support for Medicare for all in order to find specific talking points that will work to try to undermine that support. So now the survey was commissioned by none other than the centrist Democratic think tank Third Way. And let me read you the results of the survey, and we'll get into the details of how the numbers turned out the way that they did. So now, um, it started off by finding that support for Medicare for all was really high. Uh, the government run healthcare system, and by the way, that's what they framed it at. It's not government run healthcare; it's government run insurance. But nonetheless, they frame it that way, and still, Democratic voters, by a margin of 70 to 21%, said, "Yeah, oh, I'm in favor. Your government run healthcare, government run insurance, whatever. It's fine. It's better than what we have now. We are in favor of it." So now the survey goes into saying, but here's how we can oppose it. And we're going to use these specific talking points in order to oppose it. So now the study showed that Democrats are most swayed by these arguments that the program would impose a heavy cost on taxpayers, which we'll get into the details about, and threaten Medicare for senior citizens. Well, now, wait a minute here. Already incredibly untrue. So they argue that without evidence, that it would A, cost more, which again, every study that's out showed it actually costing less, and B, somehow threatening the existing Medicare system for seniors, which makes no sense because it's an expansion of Medicare. In fact, it would help seniors because it would actually cover more. It would be an expansion of benefits, vision, dental, etc. Right? And so it would also close those gaps in coverage, which have led a lot of seniors to take out expensive Medicare supplement insurance plans from private insurers. So, full of lies. So, you're not going to be surprised about who ran the poll. Now, the poll was conducted not just by Third Way, of course, but by specifically Lisa Grove of Anzalone List Grove Research. Now, her partner, John Anzalone, is the chief pollster and an advisor to Vice President Joe Biden. Oops. Shocker. So here's what they do they run a survey filled with lies in order to figure out what lies work best to support Medicare, to destroy support for Medicare for all. So that's super gross, right? So let's break down what was the most effective so that we can, of course, counter it with actual facts. Now, the survey found the Democrats are most swayed to oppose Medicare for all when told it would cost American taxpayers $3.2 trillion per year. Notice in that question, no context. So there's no context. It'll cost $3.2 trillion a year. Now, again, that's a Republican strategy of basically saying this will cost on top. Now, they don't say specifically on top, but they don't say that it will cost only 3.2. It'll cost $3.2 trillion dollars, and most people would assume that it's on top of what it already costs right now. And that's a gigantic number. When in reality, our current system costs about $3.4 trillion dollars. So it's pretty expensive. What we already have, and it doesn't cover everyone. In fact, there are millions of Americans that are covered that are not covered with insurance, or they are underinsured. People are still dying because of lack of health care, not being able to afford high deductibles or their medicine. So huge problems, huge problems. So now, again, our system is incredibly expensive as it is, and they're saying, well, it costs $3.2 trillion. That's terrible. Within 10 years, it's going to cost a lot more, $5 trillion. So, I'm sorry. In This is 3.4 a year, right? So $34 trillion over the next 10 years. our system is going to cost 50 trillion in 10 years if we go business as usual. And of course, uh, look, Joe Biden says, well, I don't want to go quite business as usual. I want to make a few tweaks to Obamacare and maybe do a public option. But that will not keep costs down. And so you will still end up having a system that, has a private insurance and maybe a public option that is, very, very weak, I can expect, because our country is corrupt, our government is corrupt. And so I don't know what the costs are going to end up looking like. But Medicare for All has the cheapest cost out of all these different plans because it tamps down on the profit motive endemic in our healthcare system. That profit motive is the problem. That profit motive creates bureaucracy, inefficiency, because some of that money is siphoned away in order to go into the pockets of executives as well as into advertising, etc. All that and stuff is part of that for-profit healthcare system. You get rid of that, you get rid of all that overhead. There's a reason that Medicare actually is so much cheaper than traditional private insurance. So, okay, now 51% of that, despite all that, 51% of Democratic primary voters said that they found that argument convincing. 43% said they did not. Absolutely disastrous. The poll also found that 51% of Democratic voters polled said the argument that it would end Medicare as we know it was convincing. Again, not true. Takes the existing Medicare program, expands it, again, covers more. It's more comprehensive, and actually outlaws private insurance that would cover those things. Okay, so it bans duplicative coverage, meaning you can't have a private insurer also cover vision and dental if Medicare for All covers that. And it does. It also covers reproductive health care. So, again, expansion of what's already there, complete and flat out lie. You can read his proposal. It's right here on Bernie Sanders' campaign website. Still, 53% found the claim that it would lower quality care for seniors convincing. Disaster. Again, Republican talking points. Okay. Not surprising, considering that Joe Biden is basically a Republican. And let's be honest about that. Now, one more finding. Democratic voters in the ALG research survey were less swayed, and this is interesting, by the fear of losing private employer-based coverage. 45% said that argument was convincing, while a majority, 49%, said it was not convincing. So they're, according to the results of this poll, I think they're going to start moving away from, but it'll take your private insurance away. Most of the voters, even in this biased poll, were like, yeah, and so? Again, still a bit of a disaster because it's such a high number. But again, private insurance would be replaced with better coverage. Employer-sponsored insurance wouldn't be a thing. That would not only help you be able to switch jobs whenever you need to without fear of losing your health insurance, but it would also save companies money because now they would not have to provide insurance to their employees, meaning that they could take some of that and actually put it back into the workers. Now, that's not going to happen unless there's a union. And so the other conversation here is, well, what's going to happen to the union benefits, right? Because they negotiated for that. Well, instead of negotiating for better healthcare, they can say, well, look, you saved so much money now that you don't have to provide healthcare for us or health insurance. So we want that money to go into wages, into higher wages. So it's also a win for unions. This survey is what they call a push poll. Again, putting out these false narratives, right? They slant the questions, they get desired results. And all in order to find what works best for trying to dismantle the idea of Medicare for all. It really is gross. So now Bernie Sanders took aim at this, and he said this, quote, "It is unfortunate but not surprising that Vice President Biden's polling firm is helping to distort what Medicare for all is all about. Any tax increases would be used to eliminate costs for people seeking health care. And of course, that means he does that by eliminating premiums, copays, and deductibles. Now, Jim Kessler, who is the executive vice president for policy at Third Way, said the poll shows that President Donald Trump is deeply underwater on healthcare, and the only lifeline that could pull him to shore is Medicare for all. Saying that this policy, if Democrats back this policy, well, they're going to let Donald Trump win. No, the only way that's going to happen is if you lie about Medicare for all. Now, the survey also tested positive messages for the policy, and when they did, it showed that 78% of Democrats were swayed by the argument that the U.S. should join the rest of the world in making healthcare a human right. And so, look, that's why you see everyone using that line. Oh, I believe healthcare is a human right. That's why I have a public option. Okay. Now, in addition, 70% of primary voters were swayed by the argument that Medicare for all would get rid of out-of-pocket costs for everyone seeking care, and that, of course, is 100% true. So they know the arguments that work in favor, and they know the arguments that work against. So now, I wouldn't be surprised to see them develop a strategy to, of course, hype up the negatives on that, and that, of course, is what we already went through. That it would end Medicare as we know it. Complete and utter horse crap. It's unreal, right? This entire thing, it shows that the Biden camp is nowhere near progressive. I know it's crazy, right? You guys are like, well, of course we know Joe Biden's not a progressive. That's a ridiculous idea. But most people don't know, because here you have media that are calling people like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi progressive. They're not at all progressive. Not at all. Only in the Democratic Party do they take, and this is the other takeaway here, money and resources to defeat their own ideas. You don't see that in the Republican Party. You don't see a massive amount of money and resources going to defeat the idea of giving tax cuts to the rich. Because essentially that's what they're doing, right? That's all they really do. But in the Democratic Party, you take an idea, they take ideas that are very popular, and they say, how can we make sure to destroy this idea that is really popular, and we could use it to win elections? Only in the Democratic Party, because unfortunately, the Democratic Party loves to lose, and at the same time, loves to please corporate donors. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.